Okay, so maybe we can start. So, hi everyone. My name is Sonia Lee. I'm the director of the Canada Climate Law Initiative. I'm very pleased to be here with you this afternoon or morning. So, the Canada Climate Law Initiative (CCLI) is hosting this info session to discuss our micro certificate program, climate risk, and ESG for corporate governance and decision making. So before I introduce our instructor and course developer, I would like to acknowledge that CCLI is located on the unceded territories of the Musqueam peoples, and I'm calling from the Tiohtià:ke territory. So in terms of how it's going to go, so we're going to start with introduction, program highlights and expectation. Allison will go to the curriculum overview, and we'll have time for Q&A questions. So feel free to ask your question in the Q&A chat function in the Zoom. So Allison is a responsible investment expert, a senior fellow at GRESB, the Canadian representative of Series, a university lecturer at the University of Alberta for the MBA program, and the principal of ESG Encompass Incorporation. She was previously the vice president of responsible investment at IMCO, where she built the responsible investment department from the ground up. And so Allison is the instructor of this micro certificate program, but she also developed all the content. And Gigi Da is the VP of Policy and Research at the Institute of Corporate Directors, so ICV. She's an instructor of corporate responsibility and ethics at Third University, and she's a board member of the Youth Dell Treatment Centers and the International Corporate Governance Network. Previously, she led the governance discipline at CPA Canada as the Director of Corporate Oversight and Governance. And Gigi was the other course developer. So in terms of the program highlights and expectations, so it is super flexible. It is 100% online, although the last cohort had the chance to gather together in person in Vancouver with Allison. So that was very great to meet together with your peers. It is quite concise. It is one module per week over 8 weeks, and you have 1 week break between the first module, the first course, I'm sorry, and the second course. And it is designed in a funnel style, and then Allison will go through kind of like all of the module a bit later. And we really focus on the Canadian kind of like landscape in terms of climate governance and Canadian organizations. So we bring to you many Canadian examples so you can relate it to your own organization. It is a peer-to-peer learning format. We have some live session, and so 5 live session between an hour and a half and 2 hours. And we kind of like increase the numbers and length of live session based on the feedback from the first cohort that was that happened last fall. And we also have office hours every single week with Allison. So if you have additional question and you want to engage with Allison, you can always show up at these office hours. It is quite accessible. I think one of the main questions that we receive is that, oh, do I need to be a lawyer or have some sort of legal background to participate in that program? And you do not. And finally, it is $3,300 to participate in this program and gain new knowledge and skills to kind of like upskill your career and make sure that you participate in your organization to be successful in your climate action. And for the curriculum overview, so as I mentioned, you have 1 module per week over 8 weeks. So it starts on April 8th. The first course ends on May 3rd, and then you have 1 week break. And then the second course starts on May 13th and finishes on June 7th. The last week, the last module is a case study that will kind of like allow you to put together all your learning that you have gained throughout the past weeks and apply them to an actual company that exists. And then you have the chance also to discuss this case study with Allison, but also with your peers to see what you've learned, what were your insights, and what you found. And we use the Canvas platform. So there's an online platform associated with UBC to access all the resources, the content, also discussion, the quizzes, and the forum. So in terms of assessment, we have quizzes. You have to participate during the live session, and you have a case study. Allison, up to you.
Thank you very much, Sonia Lee, and great to chat with everybody. Just one minor correction. I did not single-handedly create the curriculum. I was definitely a team effort, a combined effort, and there's no way I could have done it all by myself. And Sonia Lee was very helpful, as was Gigi Daw, and numerous other people have contributed as well. So team effort. Okay, so essentially, what we did with the curriculum is look at it through this funnel style, sort of from a very macro perspective, setting the stage, looking at, what has happened with climate change, even from a science perspective, and then from a governmental perspective, regulations, and then how investors are addressing climate change. Then looking at climate change from the perspective of the board of directors, and then the role of the board in overseeing climate-related risks and opportunities. So starting off with this very sort of, macro perspective at first, what is happening with respect to climate change out there, and geographically as well, and then looking specifically at the Canadian situation. And then when we go to course, and there's 4 modules in here, and these are this is how the 4 modules basically are set up in this funnel style. Can I have the second slide, please? And then the course 2 is basically now looking from the company perspective. How do you now you understand what the risks are, what is happening with respect to climate. Now, how do you go ahead and implement a climate transition strategy? And this is really following the framework of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, where you're looking at governance of climate, which would have been in the previous course. Now you're looking at the strategy, the risk, metrics, targets, reporting, etc. So the strategy and then the climate scenario analysis, how does this work? What metrics and targets should you pay attention to? What does a credible transition plan even mean? And then what types of climate and ESG reporting and disclosure should we actually be looking at? What are investors looking for? And then bringing it all actually into a case study is really useful, because then you can see from, an actual case, what are the true problems, parameters, issues, things that you might not have thought about from a theoretical perspective, now applying it to an actual case study. And throughout the course, as Sonia Lee mentioned, we have the live sessions. We have increased the number of live sessions. We only had 3 live sessions in the previous course, and the feedback from the students was they wanted more live sessions and they wanted more time in those live sessions to be able to do, basically work with each other. So networking and then actually addressing things from a more pragmatic, practical perspective, having that in-class time. Can I have the next slide, please? And the other thing that's really great, Sonia Lee talked about the flexibility of the course. And this is something that the previous students of the course really, really enjoyed. Is what we did is we've actually created webinars. These are all pre-recorded, so you can actually watch them in your own time. And these are with some of the climate governance and business leaders in Canada. So obviously our well-distinguished Dr. Janice Serra, who is the co-investigator of the Canada Climate Law Initiative. So she speaks in one webinar, which is really insightful. Barbara Zvon, who's president and CEO of UPP, and she also chairs the Climate Engagement Canada Steering Committee, and was involved with SFAC, the Sustainable Finance Action Council, looking at Canada's green taxonomy. So a huge background there. And then Stefan Tardif, who is the managing director of the Climate Risk Division of the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. His department was responsible for the B15 guideline, which now is making its way to all the federally regulated financial institutions. So if you're captured by that, you know what I'm talking about. And then there's obviously a cascading impact across the market. So these are just 3 of the webinars. There's more. We can go to the next slide. More climate governance leaders. So we have Dr. Barnali Chowdhury, who is very focused on human rights, crime and security. So looking at climate change from a different perspective. Climate change is a systemic risk, and so there's aspects across the entire ESG spectrum. And then Dale Beaugen, who is the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Climate Institute. They're doing great work there. And Sheila Coleman, who's the VP Legal and Sustainability and Corporate Secretary of London Gold, for an issuer specific perspective. And there's way more webinars as well. These are just a few of the ones that we are highlighting today. The next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And I just want to also add that we had interviews, and then we recorded new interviews, actually, Allison and I, in the past few weeks, and we're recording one next week. So we're very excited to bring these interviews to the student. So in terms of like the next slide, actually, is the kind of like question that we've been asked quite a bit, but we already have a question from one of the participants of the live info session. So their question is, when you mention climate transition strategy, is it related to GHG mitigation only, or does it include climate risk and opportunities?
Definitely includes climate risks and opportunities. And then the full spectrum, you're looking at mitigation, adaptation, climate resilience. So the full spectrum there. When firms actually start even doing their basic carbon footprinting, what's really interesting, I found this when I was head of responsible investment at AIMCO, is you immediately start to see what the key contributors are to your carbon footprint, and you start identifying where the risks are, where the vulnerabilities are, but then you also start identifying where the opportunities are. So it's really interesting how just actually starting to do that carbon accounting and then looking across the business, scope 1, scope 2, etc., how easy it is to start identifying the risks and the opportunity side of the equation.
Thank you, Allison. And if you have other questions in the audience, feel free to add them in the Q&A chat. But I will share at the next slide that we highlighted some questions that we've received in the past. So what happens if I cannot attend the live session?
So if you can't attend the live session, just let me know in advance. The sessions are recorded, so you could watch them in your own time. But you obviously are missing out on some of the questions, but you can still, I'm correct, right, Sonia Lee? They can watch the recording later. Yeah.
Exactly. We always share the recording and deck after every single live session. But ideally, you would attend all of them. But if you cannot, just let us know before, and it's not a problem.
Right. So kind of useful as well to be able to rewatch certain sections. And then this next question is the course aimed at senior executives or more broadly across the organization. I would say that it can have application across. It is aimed, I would say yes and yes. It is aimed at senior executives and board members, but it could have application more broadly across the organization as well. When we're talking about the governance and the strategy piece, that would probably be more relevant for senior executives and board members. And then this next question. Do you want me just to go ahead and answer these, Sonia Lee?
Sure. I mean, again, I do want to mention that if participants have other questions, feel free to type that in the Q&A box, but we can go over all these questions.
Right. Well, how difficult and time-consuming will the deliverables and assignments be? Well, you might need to ask the students from the previous cohort. They're not intended to be difficult. It's intended to be straightforward, pragmatic, still not just a simple box ticking exercise so that you need to think through things. The quizzes often are multiple choice. There may be some, answer type questions, but the idea is to help you get the micro certificate, not to make it, overly, not to have trick questions or anything like that. So it is intended to, we all realize that you are, working full time. And so this is, intended to fit into your schedule and not be overly difficult, but at the same time, be something that you are actually learning from. And how recognized will the micro certificate from CCLI be? You actually, I don't know if you want to speak to that, Sonia Lee, because you get that that tab that you can put on your LinkedIn profile, right? Do you want to speak to that?
Of course, yeah. So after the micro certificate, I apologize, there's a bit of noise, background noise in my apartment right now. But so yeah, so you will get a digital certificate that is both from CCLI and University of British Columbia, the Allard School of Law. And at the end, you will receive a LinkedIn badge that you can add to your LinkedIn profile that will link to kind of like a direct credential that you can share with everyone that you completed the course. And then we
Which is
received one question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ellison.
I was gonna say that's really useful because, a lot of executives are looking for people who actually have some background in climate, who understand some of the issues. So this way you can actually advertise that I took the course, I have the badge from CCLI, which is a highly respected organization. So that should be helpful for you in your careers. Go
And then
ahead.
we receive one question. I'm not a lawyer. Would I be eligible?
Of course. So you do not need to be a lawyer to take the program. The organization is called the Canadian Climate Law Initiative. I personally am not a lawyer either, although we did have quite a few lawyers take the program last time, but not everybody is a lawyer. We do look at the legal aspects, we look at the governance aspects, but certainly one does not need to be a lawyer to take the course.
Thank you. And then one of the question we received previously is that what if my firm hasn't made a net zero commitment? Can I take the course? Is it useful? Not useful?
Yes, I don't think that is, if your firm has made a net zero commitment or hasn't made a net zero commitment, regardless, the idea is to understand the drivers in climate risk and how to measure climate risk and how to assess climate risk and opportunity. It's not really regarding whether or not your firm has made a net zero commitment. So that, while that's a great thing to do, it's certainly not not pertinent to the course, I would say.
We receive another question. So my background is into IT software consulting. I'm interested in this. Could you please share some inputs on how career opportunities with IT background would rely to this course?
That's a great question. So, a lot of carbon footprinting is actually, there's different methodologies out there, and you want to align with the right methodology for the type of industry that you're in. So, for example, for financials, they will align with the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. But if you have a software background and you take this course and then you apply it, it might be very helpful to a company in the future. You may be able to look at workarounds or ways to basically assess the climate resilience of certain companies that you're dealing with. So yes, I think can see that will be very useful. Having said that, this is not, I am not a software engineer. I'm not going to be teaching any of that. But I think this is something where you could take the principles and the knowledge here and apply it to what you're doing.
Yeah, and maybe if I can add, one of our colleagues said that applies to lawyers, but I would argue that it would apply to any kind of like careers, like everyone in the future will be climate lawyers. So I think you could argue that this would apply to software engineer, uh, computer engineer,
Right.
and engineer, regular engineer. So I think this knowledge that you would gain from this micro certificate, you can apply it at least to think more holistically about sustainability and climate.
Exactly. In fact, we basically predict a future where climate-related data will be embedded in firms' financial statements. So it will be a key metric that everybody is looking at in the same breath as looking at the company's core financials. So you can look at it from that perspective as well.
And we have another question, which is this more intended for Canadian laws or international law as well?
That's great. So many Canadian companies are global players. So I think it's important to be aware of what is happening globally. We don't want Canada to fall behind from a regulatory perspective, from a climate risk perspective, et cetera. So I would say that while the focus is on Canada, there's also a global perspective there as well. So I wouldn't say that it's only on Canada. definitely with a view to what is happening globally.
Thank you, Allison. And then maybe like one of the last question, which is, will CCLI keep me informed of significant changes to the climate risk and opportunity landscape after I take the course?
Want to take that question, Sonia?
Yeah, actually, I can take it. So you can always subscribe to our newsletter, and we're happy to provide you more information. And we remain available, right? Our goal at CCLI is really to help business leaders and regulators and policymakers. So you can always reach out if you have any specific question after you take the course, and then we can provide you with resources or more knowledge that you may need. We got 2 new questions, Allison. So in
Sure. And
terms of
there's
ESG,
webinars and so on that are happening all the time. So I would say that
exactly.
CCLI is abreast of key changes. So it's a great relationship to continue with CCLI. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So in terms of ESG reporting, in what standards will you focus?
On what standards? Well, basically, I think it's looking at ESG reporting from a materiality perspective, but obviously, depending on the type of entity that you work with, you may be looking at the, B15 guideline. I do have to admit, I think the B15 guideline is great. And I told the students from the previous class that they should just print it off and put it on the back of their office doors and make sure that they're looking at it. So definitely to look at reporting from a Canadian perspective, but the TCFD framework, of course, is global, and we talk about that a lot. Most of the frameworks, most of the reporting in Canada is trying to align with the TCFD framework. Most of the climate reporting globally is also trying to align with the TCFD framework. So I would say that is probably the go-to framework.
Thank you. And then we just generally speaking, we're just all of them, and we also address ISSB S2 and
Yes, of
S1.
course. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. International Sustainability Standards Board. And then we're waiting for we're waiting for basically to see where the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board comes out with respect to how aligned will the reporting standards be for CCSB compared to ISSB? Hopefully very, very aligned.
Exactly. And then another question is, I work in the nonprofit sector for 20 years and now I have an MBA. Are there other in the nonprofit sector who have done this program too?
Yes, we had several people in the not-for-profit sector do the program. So I don't think that I don't think that would make it certainly makes a big difference. But I think that there's a use case for the not-for-profit sector, just as there is a use case for the business sector in doing this course and understanding the impacts of climate risk. Climate risk is systemic, so there aren't any organizations really that won't be impacted. So it makes sense.
Thanks, Allison. Then we had another question. Maybe I can answer that question. So the question is, how much does the course cost? So it's $3,300. Is it CRA tax deductible? So we can provide you a receipt. And I'm not entirely sure. We need to check with your accountant if you can deduct this. I don't know. Do we have other questions from the audience? What is the split of senior exec board levels versus more entry middle level career level in the previous cohort?
In the previous cohort, we had quite a few senior level executives. So chief risk officers, chief legal officers, yeah, and board members, etc. We did have a few medium level as well. So there was definitely a mix there.
Yeah,
Hopefully that answers the question.
yeah,
ahead,
and I may add to that, like we had also more senior professional, but more very entry level knowledge of climate risk and climate governance.
True.
So we had also more like maybe entry level professional, but with slightly higher level of climate risk and governance. So we had like a good mix of people that
good mix,
were able to share their learnings and insights. Yeah.
Yeah, like we had one gal from a service provider who wasn't a senior executive, but she works basically in the industry, and so she knew and understood a lot of the sustainability language and climate risk generally. So a good mix.
Yeah.
Did
Thank you,
we address
Allison.
the key learnings and objectives of the course? Did we talk about that?
No, we have two slides at the end of the
Okay.
deck that outlines all of the objective and course. You can also go on our website. That we can share that deck later on with the participant. But oh, we have another question. So what is the maximum number of students you will accept?
That's a
I,
great question. I don't know
I
the answer, Sonia
Yeah, I
Lee.
can I can answer that. So technically, it's like for I think we capped it at 40, but last court we have 15 students. So it was like a good number, so we could people were had enough time basically to share their insight and knowledge with each other, and having this kind of like safe space to share their learnings, and have enough time also to ask Allison, the instructor, your question and your own reflection. So we expect around like 20 people. We have an,
Well,
oh,
we
sorry, go ahead.
was gonna say, what we found is that the students really enjoyed spending time with each other. They learned a lot from each other. And so I could, technically just have gone, come to some session and said hi, and I'll let everybody talk amongst themselves. They got a lot out of speaking to each other and sharing strategies and ideas, and the case study I think was really, we had several case studies that we used, smaller case studies throughout the program. So I think that's very useful too. So it's good to have a mix of people. Maybe having 40 people might change the dynamics, but if we can do it, then yeah, then that's fine by me too.
And then we have another question. So if I'm volunteering on a board and plan to offer advice on climate risk, will the information we learn be sufficient in terms of positioning me as knowledgeable and expert enough to add a lot of value? Of course, I'm not expecting to be an expert, but how detailed and how deep is the info, if that makes sense?
It really depends on context, on the type of company that you're working at, and what the issues are. But certainly you'll have both that macro perspective and then the perspective of this is how to actually implement, how to measure and how to implement on climate risk and how to assess climate scenarios, et cetera. So that would definitely be useful. I'm not saying that there won't be more that you could get into, but for the purposes of this course, I think that the 8 modules, there's a lot to learn, and that will be, should be useful, should put you in good stead. But without knowing the details of the company that you work with, that's about all I can say right now. So
Thanks. And we have another question. Do you offer group rates? My colleagues are also interested. So yes, we do. So if you have a group of 4 to 10 people from the same organization, we offer 25% discount. And if you have a group of 11 to 24 individual, the discount rate is at 35% off.
I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah, and if you studied at Allard, we also have discount rate for alumni and indigenous peoples. So it doesn't seem that we have other question. So maybe we can conclude, but if you have other question, feel free to reach out by email to CCLI. We're happy to answer. So maybe to conclude, if you use this promo code InfoSession10, you get 10% off. You can use this QR code and then this link. Oh, sorry, we do have another question. Just to clarify, is this 100% on Zoom or is there a mandatory live in-person commitment?
It's 100% on Zoom. There's no mandatory live commitment. UBC being in Vancouver, we have, students from across Canada that are joining. So, having said that, the UBC or the Vancouver cohort did get together. I met with them when I was at the Globe conference a couple weeks ago, and I think they plan on continuing that network. So feel free to build networks outside of the class. But yes, there's no mandatory in-person requirement.
Thank you, Allison. So that's pretty much it for our info session. I don't know if you want to have the last word.
I just want to say thank you for checking into the program. Climate risk is the most pressing, urgent systemic risk that we think is out there right now, or one of the most pressing, I should say. There are other certainly pressing issues. We would be delighted to have you join the class. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And we try to be as accessible as we can. So thank you so much for checking into this.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.
All righty, take care.